In 1783, there was almost a military coup that almost overthrew Congress and could have set up a military dictatorship in the United States. It was a very close call. There's something that's not well known in American history. The Battle of Yorktown was in 1781, when the Americans and the French decisively defeated Cornwallis and the British Army and Navy. And that led to a cessation of hostilities while peace negotiations went on. The treaty ending the Revolutionary War and giving us our independence was signed in 1783. In that 2-year period, the Continental Army that George Washington had amassed and led began to get really nervous that the war would end before they were paid. Many of them had not been paid for years and had been given promissory notes or scrip that speculators bought for pennies on the dollar as the soldiers gave up hope of getting paid. But most of them said, we're not going to lay down our arms and go home until we get our money. In June of 1783, a group of 80 soldiers from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, left their barracks with arms and bayonets and marched on Philadelphia, where the Congress was meeting. And as they marched, they accumulated dozens and then scores and finally hundreds of people who marched along with them, most of them fully armed. The group got to Philadelphia and surrounded the Capitol where the Congress was meeting. Alexander Hamilton, who was acting for the Congress, and I get this from Hamilton's biography by Ron Chernow, a wonderful book you should get a hold of and read. He went to Philadelphia and communicated with John Dickinson, who was the head of the Executive Council of the Pennsylvania state government, and pleaded for militia. And Dickinson said, I'm not going to send militia until there's an overt act. And in disgust, Hamilton went back to Congress and told them what was going on. In the meantime, the crowd outside of the Congress had grown to hundreds of armed soldiers, and they had liberated liquor from the bars and pubs in Philadelphia and were getting drunker and more uproarious and riotous by the minute. They elected their own officers and sent them into Congress to negotiate to get their pay. And for 3 hours, Congress, the Continental Congress under the Articles of Confederation, sat there surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of troops armed to the teeth, vowing to attack until they got their money. Congress fled at that point, literally left Philadelphia and crossed the river to reassemble in Princeton, New Jersey. They chose Princeton because it was the site of Washington's crossing of the Delaware and a major continental victory to try to summon patriotism. They then left Princeton because there was really no facility to meet or to stay, and fled to Annapolis, Maryland. And from there they went to Trenton, New Jersey, and finally in 1785 settled in New York City, which became, in effect, the first capital of America when the Constitution was adopted 4 years later. Eventually, Dickinson agreed to send in the militia, and 500 militiamen came, and the Lancaster folks discarded their arms and ran back to Lancaster, and the threat was averted. But it had actually forced Congress to move. The other story, of course, which we've discussed, was that at a separate occasion, Washington met with the officers of the Continental Army and got them to agree to go home peacefully, even before they were paid or in lieu of being paid, and averted really a serious situation. 1783, the United States could have gone the way of France in 1790, when the storming of the Bastille led to massive insurrection and ultimately culminated in a dictatorship, eventually an empire run by Napoleon. But 1783 was that crucial year. Earlier this week, I cut a new podcast where I go into great depth about what's going on with the Republican nominating process and what's likely to eventuate. So give it a listen. You can click on the email abutting this video, or go to iTunes, or go to podcast1.com or go to dickmorris.com and listen to the podcasts. Thanks.